Neptune, 8th planet from the sun. A mystery now. We hope to have close-up photos from Voyager 2 in 1989.
We do have them! They're my home screen. Miss Hoover, once again, the lesson plan I prepared would have covered this topic much better, but I can see... Miss Hoover.
It's Tuesday, Lisa. Taco Tuesday.
Oh.
Huh?
Taco Tuesday! Taco Tuesday! Taco Tuesday!
Taco Tuesday! Taco Tuesday!
Oh no, I'm about to become another mopping statistic. There's only room for one of us, Ethel.
Bart, that's your 6th taco. You know, Whitman says, if anything is sacred, the human body is sacred. Fascinating.
Run into the tunnel. You have to go as fast as you can. You can trust me. It's real. It's real. Full speed, Kevin.
It's literally turning into worst case scenario.
I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case
turning
scenario.
into worst case
I'm
scenario.
afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with
literally
essentially
turning
a
into
worst
worst
case
case
scenario.
scenario.
I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're
literally
dealing
turning
with
into
essentially a
worst
worst
case
case
scenario.
scenario. I'm afraid that the latest data tells
But you can tell if someone's lying. You know, you can sort of feel it in people. And I have lied. I'm sure I'll lie again. I don't want to lie. You know, I don't think I'm a liar. I try not to be a liar. I don't want to be a liar. I think it's like really important not to be a liar.
Specialization should make you suspicious. It should, because if it's gotten harder to evaluate what's going on, then it's presumably gotten easier for people to lie and to exaggerate, and then one should be, a little bit suspicious, and that's sort of my starting bias.
I'm Dr. Ryan Cole. I'm an MD. I'm a physician. Mayo Clinic trained anatomic clinical pathology, subspecialty fellowship in dermatopathology. I do molecular biology. I've done over 150,000 COVID tests in my laboratory.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This time could be different. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. We're still trying to take back the power from these charlatans, these acolytes of the charlatans, I guess you could call them. The illusion of consensus that these people have created, the illusion of consensus that these organizations have created. Brownstone Institute just paid for a trip for a lot of these people to go to Spain. Ladies and gentlemen, your consciousness is their prime real estate, and they are playing you like a fiddle. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. It is April 1st. This is not an April Fool's stream. I'm not going to try and fool you about anything. In fact, I'm just going to try and deliver a succinct message about how they've been able to control the narrative and all the questions asked so that after 5 years, it's still only on this little tiny corner of the internet where you can hear someone say it as succinctly as RNA cannot pandemic intramuscular injections or dumb transfection was a crime, and the population pyramids are a real problem that needed solving. Let's do it, ladies and gentlemen. If you need to support the stream, we would like you to support the stream. GigaOhmBiological.com is the place to go. We did not get very many more views or followers since Kim Iverson. However, Kim Iverson just had Tom Cowan on, so maybe there's an opportunity to get on there again. Ladies and gentlemen, you hear the voice of Jonathan JJCouey. I am Chief Biologist at Gigaohm Biological. I have presented my ideas to lots of places since losing my job at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. You can find the evidence of my long academic career on the Library of Medicine's website, PubMed. You would be able to see lots of evidence of my work on this too. You can see it on PubMed there, actually, with regard to COVID-19. Where you can't see it, for example, is on the Panda website or on the Panda Rumble channel, because I presented there 3 separate times in 2023 or 2022. I think it was 2023. And those all got lost somehow because Nick Hudson, I guess, isn't very good at keeping the good presentations separate from the bad ones. The NCI is just really good at collecting thousands of hours of useless testimony and not really sorting through what's important and what's not trying to figure out what happened, just trying to create a historical document, if you will. The wellness company, they're just trying to help people by selling little kits with zippers. And the Children's Health Defense is really all about rising and resisting people over profits, truth over lies, and courage over fear. So far, they've scored so many touchdowns, it's hard to really list them all, other than to just say they've sold a lot of books. I helped them write one of them, The Wuhan Cover-Up, with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., now the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services. I presented my dismay with my current situation best and first and best probably at the Red Pill Expo. Thanks to G. Edward Griffin for letting me speak there. Of course, I'm trying to work on this thing on the basketball court, and it actually has a lot to do with me getting in shape. So a lot of my time is now spent every day trying to turn this ship around, if you will. I'm a 53-year-old man and far from young. This is Gigaohm Biological. I hope to offer you some hope this morning. Some hope that no one and everyone's going to see this at some point. No one can ignore it anymore. The history of this biology, the history of these biological ideas, the history of the pandemic, and the history of these people is all going to come together in one beautiful story of awakening. And I'm very, very excited. If you're listening from a ladder, please make sure that you keep 2 hands for the ladder. This is Gigaohm Biological. Let me just switch over here. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. My name is Jonathan Couey, coming to you live from my garage. It is April 1st, 2025, and this is no joke to me. We have put everything on the line for the last 5 years to try and get the truth out, and I stumbled and fell a few times in the first few years. I took paychecks not knowing why I was getting paid, trying to understand or believe that we were going to get free. And in the end, I find myself in the same wilderness I was at the beginning of the pandemic. But now with a little more self-assurance that where I am is closer to the truth than you can get by using social media skillfully. It's Tacos Tuesday, and tacos are not for everybody. Taco Tuesday is not for everyone, but it is for anyone who likes tacos. And Truth Tuesday would be, for anybody who likes the truth. And this is definitely a message that's not for everyone, because not everyone wants to hear that it's about the grandchildren of Earth. For example, my brother doesn't want to hear that because he's not having any kids of his own. So essentially, it means that everything that's happening in the world right now has nothing to do with him, and his choices don't matter at all. And what he says and what he passes on doesn't matter because he's not passing anything on. And that's the thing that has struck me most as a father of 3 during COVID-19 is that this whole psychological operation has one aspect of it has been to separate us from our family and friends. It separated me successfully from my brother and his wife. It successfully separated me from my parents. And my parents and I are starting to work it out over email and text, but we're far from in regular communication, and we're far from understanding where each other is. And they also could have potentially done that within households with a lot of kids, especially kids who went or were allowed to go back to college. And that's a crucial rift that is probably in existence in large swaths of America that we need to pay attention to. Because, of course, when this is about the grandchildren of Earth and the young adults that haven't yet had kids are being bombarded with messages about homosexuality and transsexuality and having kids is selfish and maybe you should only have one, they are setting up and perpetuating a population pyramid crisis that is going to lead to the depopulation of the Earth, inevitably. And it's not going to require a whole lot of extermination or famine. It's just going to happen because once, 15 years from now, the population is going to look drastically different. And it won't have the same kind of nationalistic cohesion that it had when I was growing up. Despite growing up in a relatively completely white state as a brown kid, I still grow up thinking of myself as just an American white kid, even though when I look in the mirror, I understand I don't look like everybody else that I grew up with in northern Wisconsin. It's a mentality, and the children of this generation are being raised to be hypersensitive to the outward facing phenotypes and what those supposedly mean about whether your ancestors were allowed to succeed or not. And this is an extraordinary place to be. It's part of the same mythology that has paralyzed us into believing that a novel virus is not only plausible, but obviously it happened, and maybe even they covered it up. That's why there's a fake anti-vaccine movement in America. I mean, what better way for me to say it than that? There is an I gotta put this up for a second. Hold on 1 minute. Just have to reset this guy over here. Sometimes the production crew, i.e. myself, is not ready to go with regard to, that's super tiny, but I guess we can do that. Is this one going to be big? Am I big? Yes. Okay. I'm big over here. So I guess I could I could technically do that, but I want to have the other one up, right? This one I want. Yeah, so it's for all the marbles. I mean, this is a message that's very hard to spread jovially. What? Why did you push that button? See, this is the kind of thing. And then I really don't want to be that tiny. I'd rather be bigger. It's not a very nice message to spread, but I think this one is a little bit of a tweak on it, because if your family and friends are Trump voters, if your family and friends are really into the Maha movement or believe in one or more of these pseudo heroes in this health freedom movement, then they are trapped by almost certainly what is best characterized as a fake anti-vaccine movement. And there may be very many people on the left who are wholly unaware of the idea that there is a genuine, verifiable, fake anti-vaccine movement, which has trapped a populist right into believing that they are, in fact, the anti-vaccine movement, legitimately fighting for things like free speech and free choice. Interestingly, if you're on the left, you know that free choice is often an argument used to motivate you. They have used health, freedom, and choice to motivate the right. And they have used a fake anti-vaccine movement with fake anti-vaxxers. And so if you could spread this message to your Trump voting friends, your Trump voting neighbors, not that Trump is bad, not that their ideas are wrong, but that the anti-vaccine movement in America has been fake since about 2015, when they went all in, full court press, and that you know a guy on the internet who could show them how it was done and give a few plausible reasons as to why it would have been done, you might be able to save your family and friends from that trap. And I'm not saying they're not going to vote for Trump, or they're not going to say that these other people are good guys, but they might cast doubt in the right direction, and the right direction to cast doubt is the fake anti-vaccine movement in America. Everything else is legitimate. I mean, in the sense of they are not doing something and being something else. Paul Offit is not pro-vaccine, but actually not. And that's the most important thing to understand. The anti-vaccine movement in America is almost exclusively fake. Everything that is widely visible and circulating and holding conferences and, gathering here and there and everywhere, these are all fake actors that were inserted into this narrative before the COVID-19 operation was even started, and most of them would even know that it was coming. None of them knew it was coming, but they were already in place, already doing the job of a fake anti-vaccine movement. And so the real message is that same anti-vaccine movement assisted in covering up the murder and lies. The murder and lies that were almost exclusively in America done with pure oxygen causing acute respiratory distress syndrome, the same thing that they blamed on COVID, that PCR was used malevolently for 2 or 3 years at least, and maybe malevolently used up till today, although probably more sophisticatedly used in that way. And then finally, not using antibiotics for pneumonia or urinary tract infection or sepsis is a crime. It's an absolute crime. And that's what explains this graph right here, murder and lies. And so they need people on both sides of the aisle, in the left and the right, to ask really pressing, really important sounding questions that never, ever approach these very simple conclusions. It could be about a lab leak, could be about natural virus, furin cleavage site, masks, social distancing, whether or not mandates are right. All of these things are hamster wheels that you can run in until the axle breaks. And you will never arrive at the possibility that murder and lies was used to create this mythology. Murder and lies is used to create this mythology. And so I hate to break it, be that guy, but I just don't have any faith that anyone that is acting on stage is there by chance or is there to the chagrin of the directors of the show. And that's why, we had the Honorable Tulsi Gabbard. It's what happened in front of Congress with this signal chat thing is kind of a joke, right? The fact that that Hegseth is basically made fun of as an alcoholic, that they're making fun of they're doing this stunt with this guy was set up to be this bad. Otherwise, you can't explain why his FDA videos are so over the top ridiculous, recommending the vaccine for children. I saw that years ago. If you want to hear the honest truth about it, I heard at least 3 or 4 different actors in this show say that they called Marks to tell him not to do it to kids or something like that. There are lots of pieces to this puzzle that we haven't even dropped into the picture yet. And a couple of those pieces of the puzzle have to do with how many of these actors during the timeline of COVID went specifically for the FDA and specifically for Peter Marks. A couple of these actors actually claim to have personal contact, went to school with, have his cell phone number. And so to think that the very public firing resignation of this guy and the debate around why the circumstances are as they are is by chance is absurd. We were primed to see Peter Marks where he is right now already 3 or 4 years ago by these social media performers. The people that I'm identifying as those that are covering up for this murder and lies. And they're actively working. They're paid to be on social media. I know this is not a message for everybody, but anyone can hear that this is a message of hope. This means it's very simple. We just need to see the liars for what they're doing. Identify the way that they coordinate their message and then call them out on it. Not allow them to parade around on social media as if these interactions and these interviewing other people who interview other people is solving any problems. That the opinion of people who interview other people is even relevant if they're not actively trying to learn and demonstrating that they have some idea of how to synthesize recent events. Again, it's not a message for everyone, but it's a message for anyone who wants to know the truth. And so I like to start with the truth all of the time. I think everyone should begin with the truth. The illusion is sustained only through your participation. Transfection in healthy people is a crime. RNA cannot pandemic. And intramuscular injection is dumb. It's not medicine. And these truths we've been saying for quite some time all are there and part of the main illusion, which is that the U.S. vaccine schedule is a criminal enterprise. And if anybody wanted to show you that before the pandemic or during it, all they would have to do is suggest that you compare it to any other vaccine schedule in the Western world. And it would already become apparent to you that both the way we do it, the number of doses we do it, and how early we do it is malevolent. Never mind if what I say is true, that intramuscular injection in general is dumb, then every vaccine schedule is a criminal enterprise. So that's a pretty bold statement to make on the internet and on YouTube and have people just kind of ignore you and send malicious emails about how you're lying about them or something like that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just saying it. You got to learn biology. That's the way out. If you can't learn it from me, buy some books and read. But you got to learn biology because it's for all the marbles. This is definitely for all the marbles. It's for all the grandchildren of Earth. And so we need to get to people and get them to understand that there is a fake anti-vaccine movement in America. We need to get them to understand that very, very much by making them, challenging them to ask the question, what progress have they made? And that's why I really like making a calendar. Here's a calendar for somebody that I know named Brandy, who in 2015 started to think about whether or not vaccines should be mandated and was wondering why they would be, and had an unvaccinated son. And in about a year had progressed to the point where she was teaching people in person that they should just consider the broad ideas of injection versus ingestion of a pharmaceutical and then consider the fact that the injection doesn't have any liability. That's very strange because the injection is full of garbage. And that's a mom with an unvaccinated child who regularly says that she feels bad because, you know, she didn't really even speak out about her unvaccinated child until she was kind of forced to accept a mandate in California. And then she spoke out, and that was already kind of late. She could have saved more people than that. She happened to be dead on December 7th, 2020. So that's one timeline you could compare. If you were an anti-vaccine person, I think a very legitimate place to get is where Gigaohm Biological, myself, got all by ourselves without really knowing that Brandy had already gotten there. Maybe because it's hard to understand the significance of this conceptual location, this dichotomy between injection and ingestion and all of the biological differences therein. And I was just starting to say intramuscular injection is dumb, as Brandy was pointed out to me again by viewers, not by anybody else. It's certainly not the social media algorithm. If you like that, you might like Brandy Vaughton. That didn't happen. Let's compare the timeline of another guy in 2013 whose son was injured, given many vaccines coincident with an ear canal infection, questioned the rationale of vaccination in general, doesn't even use the word autism. He thinks that word is kind of bullshit and just calls his son vaccine injured or neurologically damaged. And he had 16 years of experience genetically modifying plants. Now, if this dude, because remember the Brandy that we talked about was, 2015, 16, and then she was dead in 2020. This guy, 2013, he already knows, like years before Brandy, that autism's kind of a scam. I don't even know if vaccine is good. Certainly giving many vaccines is nuts. And he's a plant geneticist, transforming guy, And would it surprise you that in 2020, that guy was a health freedom anti-mandate activist? Would it surprise you that he was still telling about the story about his kid getting vaccines during an ear infection? Would it surprise you that he already knew that COVID spread asymptomatically for about a week? Would it surprise you that he was already advocating for more PCR testing, or that antibodies are a not so perfect model for immunity, but we can still talk about them because natural immunity is real? Did you realize that he was just arguing that the vaccines, the COVID vaccine studies were underpowered? The guy who didn't want to call it autism but wanted to call it vaccine damage, wasn't even sure which one did it, was now a guy who worked on transfections and transformations in plants, was calling them vaccines and just complaining about the power in the study. He didn't say anything about what they really were, and he didn't mention Brandy being dead. The lady that said ingestion versus injection. Would it surprise you that that guy's been in front of the Senate and now is one of the main leaders of the health freedom movement that opposes medical mandates, advocates for free speech and free choice, and wants safe vaccines? Would that surprise you, or would you be disturbed, especially if it followed 5 years of a pandemic? 2013 to 2025. How's that for a timeline? Compare that timeline to Brandy's timeline.
Hey guys, we're incredibly lucky today to have Dr. Anthony
How about this
Fauci,
timeline?
who's the
Here's
director
Dr.
of the
Mike.
Allergy and Infectious Disease branch of the NIH. You may have seen him on stage with Trump as he's part of the coronavirus task force. He's going to be answering some of our questions today. Let's get right to it.
Dr. Mike, how are you?
How's it going?
Running around like a maniac here, but other than that, I'm good.
I can only imagine. I heard your wife was forcing you to get at least 4 or 5 hours of sleep. I'm proud of her for doing that.
Yes, 4 hours is all I'm doing, but she's the one that's doing it. She's the one that's doing it.
All right, fair enough. Well, first of all, let me say a huge thank you for joining us on the YouTube channel. Everyone in the YouTube community really appreciates what you're doing. My whole channel is about fact-checking, putting out accurate info, and you've essentially become the face for that. So huge thanks from all of us for that.
That's funny.
Let's start by talking about social distancing. It's something that I've explained to my audience that's incredibly important. That's how we control the spread of this virus, the run on hospitals. There's been a lot of talk recently about curtailing that. I'm curious not so much about the date because, as you said, the virus doesn't have a timeline. What is the yardstick that we're going to be using to measure when it may be safe to curtail the social distancing? Is it number of those who are ill, fatalities, hospital preparedness? What say you?
Well, it's a combination of things, and it's
Okay, so first of all, let's just point out the fact that Tony Fauci, there's something really strange here, and in retrospect, you can see it. Okay, I want to challenge you to see it. We are supposed to believe that Tony Fauci on March 29th, 2020 is already keenly aware for a couple months that a lab leak gain-of-function virus has been leaked onto Earth and will likely go endemic and kill maybe billions of people. And they may have funded it. There may be a paper trail includes grant applications that will lead back to him. And we're supposed to believe that this is how cool he is. That this is, running around, really excited. Think about that very carefully, please. It's something to consider. I'm going to so much that I want you to watch it again.
Of the country.
We become the face for that. How's it going?
Running around like a maniac.
Task Force. He's going to be answering some of our questions today. Let's get right to it.
Dr. Mike, how are you?
How's it going?
Running around like a maniac here, but other than that, I'm good.
I can only imagine. I heard your wife was forcing you to get at least 4 or 5 hours of sleep. I'm proud of her for doing that.
Yeah, 4 hours is all I'm doing, but she's the one that's doing it. She's the one that's doing it.
All right, fair enough. Well, first of all, let me say a huge thank you for joining us on the YouTube channel. Everyone in the YouTube community really appreciates what you're doing. My whole channel is about fact-checking, putting out accurate info, and you've essentially become the face for that. So huge thanks from all of us for that. Let's start by talking about social distancing. It's something that I've explained to my audience that's incredibly important. That's how we control the spread of this virus, the run on hospitals. There's been a lot of talk recently about curtailing that. I'm curious not so much about the date because, as you said, the virus doesn't have a timeline. What is the yardstick that we're going to be using to measure when it may be safe to curtail the social distancing? Is it number of those who are ill, fatalities, hospital preparedness? What say you?
Well, it's a combination of things, and it's going to be different through different regions of the country because you can't look at it as unidimensional. I mean, New York is clearly different from Washington, and it's clearly different from Alabama. But in direct answer to your question, you look at two things. You look at the kinetics of the outbreak when you're in the middle of an outbreak. So once it starts reaching that point of plateauing a bit and coming down, you don't want to stop the social distancing, but you may be able to relieve the restrictions on movement in order to get basic supplies to people so that they're not just locked down. If you have an area that has very few cases, what you want to do is you want to test a lot in that area to get a feel for what the penetrance of the virus is. And when you get an individual case, you want to immediately identify it, isolate it, contact trace it, and get it out of society. If you do that efficiently, you may be able to open up that community because you're doing good containment. You know, the two major pillars are containment, where you try to stop the spread, and the other is mitigation, when you say, oh my goodness, it's here, what are we going to do to prevent it from getting worse?
Do you think that there would be any conditions where you think politicians may act too soon and start saying, let's start opening up some of these restrictions? What would happen in a red alert type scenario like that?
Well, I think that would be unfortunate, and that's the thing that we advise against. If you do open up too soon, you could have the perverse effect that as it's going this way, then it starts going back up.
Sure.
And then you essentially compound the need for the kind of things, respirators, ventilators, hospital beds, ICU, things like that.
You've talked a little bit about seasonality, the possibility that this virus may go away for the summer, may return in the fall, certainly not a definite. But if that were to happen, what preparations can we take as ordinary citizens for the fall? And myself as someone who's on the front lines as a family medicine doctor, what can we do?
Okay. First of all, if that happens, and to be honest with you, I think it's going to happen, I really don't see something as robustly transmitted as this disappearing the way SARS did, particularly if we start to see an increase in infections in the southern hemisphere, southern Africa, places like that, now as they enter their winter, which means for sure a cycle will come back. That means that as we go down in our cases, we've got to use that time to prepare that it doesn't happen to us to the extent that it did the first time around. That's why we've got to do the vaccine development that we're doing. We've got to do clinical trials in drugs, randomized controlled trials that prove things work, as opposed to maybe they're going to work. Those are the things that we need to do, as well as get the kind of testing capabilities so that you can do good containment without waiting until it gets into mitigation. We may have a window, and it's not going to be over. We're going to breathe a sigh of relief when it starts to go down, but we need to gird ourselves that it may come back.
You mentioned the clinical trials. There's hundreds of clinical trials going on right now, testing all sorts of combinations.
First, I'm going to stop here and move this this line over, because it should be after the first peaks. This March 29th, and that first peak is like right there. So we're on the way down, and that's why they're talking like this, because the first wave has been stopped by the lockdown. And now they're talking about what happens if people open up too early. So one of the questions that's really important is whether people should open up early. He's starting to throw out a lot of words like contact tracing and containment and mitigation, respirators and ventilators. And seasonality is gonna happen. It's gonna come back. He's sure it's gonna come back. It's not gonna be like SARS-1. It's too contagious for that. So we need to start randomized control trials, because that's how you know if something works. Of course, we're not going to apply that to the COVID-19 vaccine. That would be absurd. And if we do, it's going to be underpowered, and there'll be people like Brian Hooker to tell us there weren't enough people in the trial. Or even Steve Kirsch can point out that, hey, look, some people died. So the testing capabilities are coming up here. And this guy just goes along with it. This is just unwitting. You know, this is a well-trained physician. And so he's not going to question any of this stuff. He doesn't have the broad background in biology to be able to question this stuff. He has been thrown as much information as his brain could handle and hold on to in the last 4 or 5 years. And this training has resulted in no understanding, only flowcharts that he can move through and assumptions that he works from. And the assumption that he's working from, number one, being this guy is a good guy telling him, you know, the real thing here.
Remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine, even plasma transfusions are all on the table. I know that we don't have any randomized controlled results yet. Do you have a medication or a treatment that you think is a front runner at this time?
Well, you know, we have a remdesivir trial that we do have a randomized controlled trial. And I would hope that within the next couple of months or less, and I would say or less, we're either going to get an efficacy signal, then we can say, well, let's do it. Let it rip with that drug. Or we're going to get nothing. And then we'll say, get it off the table and stop wasting time.
Sure.
But I think that's going to be reasonably soon.
Okay.
And also the plasma transfusions, immune globulin, those kinds of things, monoclonal antibodies, they're all going to be going into testing.
Okay. When I meant about the randomized controlled studies, that we don't have the results to those studies yet, because that's why it's difficult to pick a front runner.
Yeah. We don't have the results.
Yeah.
The N is not big enough yet. When we get a big enough N, we'll know.
Absolutely. We need them powered. Young people, they seem to be more affected, or at least that's what the media is telling us here in the United States. Is that true? And if so, why here more than in China?
That's a good question. Everybody knows that the original China data made it look like young people virtually never got involved in a serious way. Then as we start getting into Italy, looking a little bit more like us, France, European countries, and ourselves, we're starting to see individuals in their 30s and 40s. Now, if you look at them, still, many of them have underlying conditions.
What I'm suggesting is that they only had to do it to a few of those people with supplementary oxygen and high flow, and they could kill anybody they wanted to. In a few hours, they would develop acute respiratory distress syndrome, and then any number of paths could take them to death. In addition, of course, the expected what am I trying to say here? the life expectancy in America has gone down largely due to the opioid crisis that was allowed to go bananas from 2019 forward. And even if it is a little bit curtailing now, for the last 5 years, it has been brutal and definitely contributed to an inordinate amount of people under the age of 40 dying. And that's a significant thing that at the time we could not have seen. We could have not realized the role that it would play in this narrative. And actually, it's hard to conceive of how few of these people, these victims of supplementary oxygen, would be required in order for this to create more than an anecdotal impression on people. I mean, again, these are people on the internet are agreeing this is true.
Even though they're 30 or 40, they have diabetes, they have hypertension, they have things like that. But if you look closely, you will see that there are young people who are otherwise well, who can get seriously ill. So we need to forget this, that if you're young, you're good to go, you have no problem.
Anybody can get seriously ill if they go to the hospital testing positive for COVID, maybe having a low pulse ox, and given supplementary oxygen. That's the frustrating part about all these guys that are talking smack about there being no virus, because they have no explanation for what happened to people. But people who are wearing masks can have respiratory distress. People who are using a pulse oximeter to monitor their pulse ox for the first time in their life may be unaware that their pulse ox is regularly low because of their smoking or their lack of athletic prowess, or their wearing of an N95 mask for 8 hours a day because the TV's told them to. If you go to the hospital complaining of a low pulse ox and they gave you supplementary oxygen in 2020, you may have been murdered. And it's interesting because we still need an explanation for why people died. We still need an explanation for why people got sick, specifically in hospitals. And it doesn't seem like very many people have the simple explanation that we're trying to give, which you guys all know very well now. Shit. Sorry about that. That's just for the green screen. If antigen tests and quick at-home COVID tests were bullshit in 2020, and pulse ox from masks was enough, if these two things, or even just one of the two, could get you to go to a hospital like the FLCC told you to do, seek treatment if you test positive or if your pulse ox is below 96%. If you sought treatment because the TV terrified you, chances are, if you were given supplementary oxygen, you might have also been murdered. Or potentially murdered had things gone south for you. That's all you need to create a pandemic. See, nothing else. Now, there are ways we could enhance it. There's ways that we could make it even more foolproof. And they're proven molecular biological techniques that don't need smoke and mirrors, don't need virology, don't need any of that stuff to be true. And yet, for some reason or another, this is the only channel on the internet that can explain to you that it is as simple as misconstruing a background with spread. If these tests just misconstrued a background signal or many background signals has evidence of spread, and these things could be used to justify the use of supplementary oxygen. These things could be used to justify supplementary oxygen. There you have it. Murder and lies. And do you think for 1 second that this is a guy who thinks that the plan is about to fail? That if he says the wrong word that somebody might figure it out? Or does this look like a guy who's absolutely sure that there's no danger to him, no danger to his family, no danger to the people around him, and that everything is under control? Because that's what I see. I see a guy who knows exactly how the narrative is going to go, exactly how the narrative is going to be kept on the rails, and knows exactly that they have enough people in place on the internet to do it. And this guy unwittingly is one of them. Maybe wittingly. He just likes to be a part of saving the world. Sure, I get it. I thought I was doing that too when I was screaming lab leak in 2020.
Problem. There are two issues with younger people you need to consider. A, you need to avoid infection, just like everybody else, not only for your own health, but even if you get trivially involved, you can be a vector that would ultimately infect someone who does have a real risk of serious conditions. It's kind of like the young, healthy 25-year-old gets infected, goes home, infects grandma and grandpa, or a 40-year-old uncle who has metastatic disease on chemotherapy. That's the problem.
There's been some talk about the possibility of reinfection with COVID-19. Now, do you think that this is more an issue with testing, that the test remains positive, or are they truly being infected for a second time with the virus?
You know, I don't know the answer to that 100%, but I would be willing to bet on my experience, and I'll bet your experience, that any virus that you have, if you do well, recover and clear the virus, if it acts like any other virus, you're going to have lasting immunity. Sure. You're not going to get reinfected.
Yeah, the way that I've thought about it is there's certain illnesses where you get lifelong immunity, chickenpox, measles with your 2 vaccinations. So maybe this won't be lifelong immunity, but to say there's none where you can...
I mean, there's a nice script right there, right? Sorry. I didn't mean to do that. It's a nice script right there. He's saying, let me just escape and start that again, and then I will pause the video.
Hey guys, we're incredibly lucky today to have Dr. Anthony
Italy, looking a little bit more like us, France, Europe.
He's saying that there were 2 parts of that script that I thought was really good. First of all, he said that there are certain diseases like chickenpox where you get lifelong immunity, or from your 2 measles shots. So that's not really the right way for him to have said that in that context, of course, because there is a rule. If you are born before 1957, you're not even recommended to take a measles shot. Why? Because you already had it. And the vaccine isn't really good for people that had it for some reason. The primary counterindication for any vaccine was prior infection to that target, which is interesting because that whole principle was thrown out during this. If you had it, you were still recommended to get it, at least by the CDC. And so he says lasting immunity. He doesn't say natural immunity. And this guy says lifelong immunity, not natural immunity. And of course, the other side, the right side, the fake anti-vaccine movement was very focused on the 2 words natural immunity, natural immunity. That was Mike Yeadon and Ryan Cole primarily were saying natural immunity, not lasting immunity or lifelong immunity, but so, and you see that is a subtle difference that is part of this enchantment. It's designed that way.
European countries and ourselves, we're starting to see individuals in their 30s and 40s. Now, if you look at them, still, many of them have underlying conditions, even though they're 30 or 40. They have diabetes, they have hypertension, they have things like that. But if you look closely, you will see that there are young people who are otherwise well, who can get seriously ill. So we need to forget this, that if you're young, you're good to go, you have no problem. There are 2 issues with younger people you need to consider. A, you need to avoid infection, just like everybody else, not only for your own health, but even if you get trivially involved, you can be a vector that would ultimately infect someone who does have a real risk of serious conditions. It's kind of like the young, healthy 25-year-old gets infected, goes home, infects grandma and grandpa, or a 40-year-old uncle who has metastatic disease on chemotherapy. That's the problem.
I think some people are unfortunately, darn it, is that right? I think some people are misunderstanding the supplementary oxygen narrative and getting a lot of sand in their folds. And it's unfortunate because it oftentimes is the same people who get the sand in their folds. So please take a deep breath and try to understand that the words have meaning and concept beyond the words themselves. If you understand that there are thousands of ways to kill people once they come to a hospital complaining of low pulse ox or complaining of a COVID-19 positive test, if you understand that, then you're on the same page as me. What I'm trying to point out is that all of those other things are covered by this bullshit narrative of these people had all kinds of comorbidities, so they were easier to kill. They were easier to kill. We have a much better narrative for why they died, and we can blame it on their positive COVID test and their comorbidities. Yes, there's lots of ways to kill people, but healthy people that came into the hospital because they were scared, young people that came in because they were scared, needed a fast track to the point where they could be not treated for pneumonia, because pneumonia from a virus doesn't respond to antibiotics, can be done with just supplementary oxygen. One of the progressions of ARDS is pneumonia. Secondary bacterial pneumonia. The whole word secondary bacterial pneumonia is so stupid. And so be very careful in trying to criticize this work. If you think that I'm not delivering this message correctly, it's time for you to get your own stream and start trying to deliver it yourself. Everybody, it's time to start making your own posters, doing your own t-shirts and selling them, doing your own work. If it's that easy, do it. Because what I'm trying to do is convince people on the left that there is a fake anti-vaccine movement, and it is contiguous with this fake COVID. And none of the people in the fake anti-vaccine movement have been able to explain how easy it would be to create the illusion of a pandemic using supplementary oxygen to get healthy people on the same road as people with comorbidities in a hospital. And you don't have to do it to that many. I hope that makes it clear. I'm not saying that everybody was killed the same way. I'm saying that there is a crucial piece to the puzzle which everyone is ignoring that gets them to the stage where they have a pneumonia that they can say is due to a virus. They do it with supplementary oxygen or ventilation. And they did it to a lot of people with comorbidities. Yes, but also healthy. That's why they can talk like this.
There's been some talk about the possibility of reinfection with COVID-19. Now, do you think that this is more an issue with testing, that the test remains positive, or are they truly being infected for a second time with the virus?
You know, I don't know the answer to that 100%, but I would be willing to bet on my experience, and I'll bet your experience, that any virus that you have, if you do well, recover and clear the virus, if it acts like any other virus, you're going to have lasting immunity. Sure. You're not going to get reinfected.
Yeah, the way that I've thought about it is there's certain illnesses where you get lifelong immunity, chicken pox, measles with your 2 vaccinations. So maybe this won't be lifelong immunity, but to say there's none where you can get reinfected in 2 weeks, something seems off.
No, that's inconceivable to me that that's the case. Okay. I mean, you're going to have some degree of durable immunity. You're right. It may not be 50 years, but it's certainly going to be a matter of a few years.
Sure.
Right.
For myself as a healthcare provider, this is something my hospital system even asked me to ask you. When is it safe for us to return to work once we've either tested positive for COVID-19 or, you know, with a lack of testing kits, had an upper respiratory viral illness where we don't know if it was COVID-19? When can we return? Is it when
upper respiratory viral illness? You see, it's always the same bullshit. Then they are exempt from using antibiotics and they can go forward. If they need to use supplementary oxygen, they could use supplementary oxygen. They could use remdesivir to treat that virus. They could do any number of things, including send people home. I think anybody that objects to me saying supplementary oxygen is working against us, because supplementary oxygen is on too many people's medical reports as the way everything started when they got into the hospital, and it explains 2020. It is enough to explain 2020. It's enough to explain 2021. It's enough to explain 2022. That in addition to tweaking any knob possible, simply giving oxygen when it's not necessary, even 80%, can potentially injure somebody. And I don't think that you can discard this, because doctors need to understand this, or there will be another respiratory disease going through our hospitals, which will be the result of the application of otherwise ridiculous protocols again. Supplementary oxygen is not that useful. Supplementary oxygen isn't that useful. There is a plethora of a giant pile of literature about this that goes back to the mid-'80s. That's the extraordinary thing about the supplementary oxygen problem. You can't discount the fact that there was a cruise ship with an oxygen plant in New York City where this bomb went off, where supposedly it was fraudulently 25,000 people died. It's a combination probably of fraud and murder, and do not resuscitate orders and all of these things, but they pushed this oxygen as a story, them running out. They pushed this oxygen story as 60 liters a minute is okay. And they had people on the internet saying it so that other doctors in the United States would not realize, not see the absurdity. I mean, everybody else is doing it. That's how they've solved it in New York. I think discounting the supplementary oxygen as explanatory for a lot of the murder, or the starting point of a lot of the murder, is a very, very dangerous assumption to make.
Fever subsides 24 hours after fever subsides, or do we do a full 14-day or 21-day quarantine?
If you are a healthcare provider or someone who is in a critical infrastructure and you need to get back to work, to assume that you're infected, what you can do is that you can wear a mask, take your temperature daily, monitor yourself. If you get symptoms, get out of circulation. If not...
You are really something else there, Free Mayonnaise. I mean, I find it impressive that you work so hard to argue about this. The simple fact is that they had to fool doctors with the TV programs and with the social media, and supplementary oxygen was talked about by people like Pierre Corey, Kyle Seidel, Nurse Aaron, all of these people. And it's the idea that you call it weak AF. I think you're just revealing yourself in the same way that you reveal yourself sometimes on the soapbox. I don't understand why you're doing it, but it does not discount the fact that there are many ways to murder people. What is important to understand is that no one else talks about it. No one else mentions the opioid crisis. No one else mentions that lots of people were probably started on the road to a COVID death by just supplementary oxygen because it's dumb. Because it's easy to get young doctors that are manning an over-panicked ER to do that, or nurses to do that. It's easy. But again, you know, if you don't like how I'm presenting it, I just suggest you start your own stream or go do it yourself. I'm sure you can teach it better than me.
Assume you're infected, but do it in a way where you don't infect anybody else. Otherwise, every one of our healthcare providers are getting exposed every day.
I don't even know what
they're infected. They've just got.
I don't even know what ambiguous hand waving is. It's a crime. I don't know all the ways that they murdered people, but I know one of the ways that nobody's talking about, and you seem to have a real problem with me talking about, is supplementary oxygen. Come on, man.
Gotta go to work, and that's
your mayonnaise is spread over too much bread, dude.
That brings me to the topic of personal protective equipment, N95 masks. As recently as last week, my hospital...
It doesn't prove that the therapy works, dude. It proves that it was part of their show. Are you that bad at this? They made a huge show of it. Wow. I mean, it's pathetic, man. I'm gonna try to ignore you in the chat for a little while, just because I think you're lost or something.
Hospital was in need of these donations. I actually went on a journey to purchase $50,000 worth of masks myself from construction workers and was able to donate them. Why do you think there's such a shortage? Obviously, there's huge demand because we need to constantly be using these masks New York Presbyterian Hospital System, they use 40 to 70,000 masks a day. But do you also think there's an issue of hoarding here or some sort of customs issue of getting these masks shipped over?
It's a combination of all of the above. So one of the things that
okay, so I think the point is made here, right? That this whole narrative is laid out. He's reading a script. He's answering the questions. It's 2020. It's March. It's funny. Nobody's worried that their lab leak, connection to this disaster, impending 7 billion people dead, that he's not worried about that. He's not worried about that because that has nothing to do with the truth. And so the idea that we're all fired up now about Tony Fauci having covered up the lab leak and that this whole show got us fired up about that is exactly visible here. He's had 2 months to shit his pants. He's had 2 months to be terrified that his emails are going to be leaked. So if we go on, a year later, they're on again together. And they're going to talk about it after almost all the murder's over.
If anyone who's involved in science to say you should never change your mind doesn't understand what science is.
Well, Dr. Fauci, thank you so much for joining us on the YouTube channel.
You have no disagreement, Mr. Freemanase. You haven't been able to say what your disagreement is. You haven't been able to articulate it on Soapbox. You've never been able to articulate it everywhere. Your main message seems to be that I don't listen to people or that I don't listen to you. I don't even know who you are, but you have identified yourself very well today, and I do appreciate that.
Panel again, it's been a year since you and I have spoken. We're doing it now in person without masks on. Right. Thanks to the vaccine. How amazing is that?
Indeed. It's really one of the most important contributions in biomedical research to so quickly and effectively get a vaccine that right now is performing in the real world even better than it did in the clinical.
Now, look at the difference between, you think he's just 2 years tired? Or now is he worried about something? I think he's now worried about the fact that the effectiveness illusion is going to be broken because people haven't taken it seriously, because not enough people have taken it, because the lockdowns didn't work, because the stories didn't work, because whatever. It's off the rails already. And he's worried. He doesn't like where they are. Could it be because of warp speed? That we were supposed to have 2 years of show, pomp and circumstance, development, trials, and we don't have that. It's not happening like that. And so this sucks because, I gotta say what I'm supposed to say. I gotta stay on script like this vaccine is the best vaccine we've ever had because, in 2007, Paul Offit already wrote a book about from cowpox to mRNA. And so I've got to stick to the script, even though, unfortunately, it's going way faster than it was supposed to. And this is not going to be great for whatever. Now it's going to be even more obvious that we're using placebo. I just don't really like where this is going. That's what he looks like he's saying, which is really impressive, I think.
Trials.
So you feel more confident in the vaccine now than perhaps you did in December 2020?
Oh yeah, and the reason is that in December 2020, we had the results of the clinical trials, which were very impressive. 94%, 95%. But often is the case is that when you get into the real world of how the vaccine performs outside of the pristine conditions of the clinical trials, it doesn't usually look as good as it looks in the clinical trials.
You keep saying that disagreeing is unfortunate here, and that seems to be your message, Freemanase. So what's happening in the chat, if you're not paying attention to the chat, is there's somebody that has been communicating with our community for quite some time, who's slowly kind of morphed into this dude who complains a lot and makes a lot of people angry on Soapbox and insults people because they're not very smart and belittles them from a point of anonymity. And now in the chat, he's pretending to have some objection to to how I was oversimplifying things, I guess, and that now I'm hedging my bets with the idea of repeating in the chat that Jay doesn't like disagreement. And this is really funny because, again, this is the panic that happens when they realize that the train can't be stopped anymore, that they're not going to be able to derail it by, I don't know, getting me mad or something like that. The clear message here is that this little social media performer was put in place with a script, and he will continue to follow the script just like Tony Fauci will continue to follow his script, even if it's off, even if the timeline isn't lining up anymore or they're not meeting their quotas. They are going to stay on that script. They have to, because it's been laid in place for so long, it's almost hard to conceive another way of executing it. So they're going to continue to perform on social media and perform on social media to the point where Paul Offit will also come on this guy's stream, to where in this stream, this guy's going to talk about how the COVID-19 shots will eventually be on the childhood schedule, right? And Tony Fauci will say, yeah, that's the logical place that it will go. In 2021, in June. And so this is a script, but it's moving way too fast for the people it's supposed to trap. It's moving way too fast because on the other side of the aisle in 2021, there are people in June who are just now coming out on Brett Weinstein's show to say, hey, I invented RNA and I know a little bit about this stuff and ivermectin and zero COVID. The exact same month, might even be the same week. And so this narrative was prepared so that social media could be used as a weaponized system of control. And that narrative out there has some very simple moving parts that nobody will talk about, like the PCR test, like what happens to people when they go to hospitals. That includes, but is definitely not limited to, the use of supplementary oxygen. It's also the unbelievable misuse, not using antibiotics when it's a viral syndrome. Probably that's the worst one because, you know, old people die of pneumonia all the time. We've seen that on the screen for 3 years now. They lost control of pneumonia for a couple years, and that's probably antibiotics. So, I mean, I'm going to let this play a little while longer, and then we're going to go to the big
On the contrary, we're seeing the opposite now. We're seeing that when you get data, not only from the United States, I mean, when I say data, I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of people being followed up in prospective cohort studies. The data are at least as good, if not even better, not only against what we call the wild type virus, namely the one that's the standard one, but when variants appear, the vaccine seems to do quite well against them also. So it really is very good news with regard to vaccines.
In this year, how do you feel where we are in our current battle with the pandemic?
Overall, I think it's very positive. But one of the things that we get concerned about is...
He's so terrified that people are going to figure out that it's a lab leak that he's really barely able to talk, right? He's so worried that the funding stream that led to this pandemic is going to lead back to his doorstep, isn't he? I think the only thing he's worried about is the uptake of his bullshit placebo rollout isn't going very well. And since they didn't scare them well enough to take it up, then it won't have the psychological effect that they needed it to, which is to permanently brainwash generations to come into believing that, you know, intramuscular injections are a great way to give people medicine. Transfection is a great new way to medicate people. I see a very simple I see a very simple show now.
Declaring victory prematurely. Because even though if you look at all of the parameters, particularly most recently over the last month or two, is that the 7-day average of daily cases continues to come down and down.
Oh,
One
yeah,
of the
sorry, I
issues
was a
with
little
that
bit off
is
there
if we
then.
see the numbers go down and people say, well, then why should I get vaccinated? Everything seems to be going well. That's a mistake. If you don't really get the level down very, very low, there's always the concern and the real concern, not just theoretical, that you could start getting more infections. At least in this country, we're in a very fortunate situation that we have enough vaccines to vaccinate everybody. When you look at other countries where they're literally and figuratively dying to get vaccinated because they don't have enough vaccines.
That is a hard sell. I mean, that is a hard sell. And I think it edifies the previous point that I made, that this is a guy very different than the first guy, where he thought, wow, this is the show that I've been waiting for. This is the performance of my life. We just kicked off something I'm so excited about doing that I can hardly sleep. My wife forces me to sleep 4 hours a day. Does that look like this guy now? Or does this guy look like a dude who's got things are way out of his control and he's just trying to mitigate the flood? The dam is breaking, and it's not a dam breaking on the gain of function narrative. It's a dam breaking on the bullshit play to get everybody to take mRNA under the pretense of a crisis that doesn't exist. An anticipated rise in all-cause mortality that is being sculpted in any way possible to create the illusion of a pandemic, including losing control of pneumonia for a couple of years. That's why he looks like this. This was not the plan. You see how the deaths go away? The deaths were supposed to go longer and then go away later, you know, when the vaccine worked. It's remarkable. I really think that that's where we are.
I mean, take India, has 2 to 3% of their population is fully vaccinated, and about 11 to 12% have received at least one dose. I mean, that is not good.
Absolutely.
Unbelievable kind of narrative curation here, where they're just telling stories about shortage and suffering with no evidence whatsoever, but it totally played us into the hog trap. We ran face first into the cage. So where do you think this guy is in 2025? What do you think he's doing now? Do you think he's gained weight, or do you think he's skinnier? Do you think he's coming around to the idea, you know, that some things were done wrong? What do you think they're using him for now? Remember, after 2021, Paul Offit was on his stream 3 times, 2 times in the last year. Also, Marty McCarty was on his stream once to say how our food is bad. So a very interesting train of people have been on his show, but he does a lot of nonsense and it's a lot of bullshit, and his thumbnails are professionally produced. I mean, this guy's got investors. People have invested in his brand, you know, the whole 9 yards. And they have used him. I'm sure he makes a great living as a content creator, quote unquote. The focus of content creation is probably what we should call these people. And I'm not a focus of content creation. I am the content creator. That's why when I reach over and do something like this, that's what happens. And when I reach over and push another button, you know, and it's not set up correctly, that's what happens. And none of these people are doing that. None of the people that you follow are doing that. You know, Robert Malone, any of these people, none of them. Tucker Carlson, these are, you know, even Kim Iverson. We're not, no. The real independent bright web is people like me. People like Mark Kulak, who do everything they do. One man shows, one woman shows. If there are any, let me know. But that's it. And this guy's not one of them. This guy's part of the machine, following the script. So where is he in 2025? Where is he in 2025?
I've heard you say numbers.
So I forgot. He also interviews a guy with a couple Vax books. This would have been an interview with Paul Offit, but I didn't throw it in.
He's not necessarily anti-vaccine, but he wants safe vaccines.
Yeah, so I'm pointing out that I think RFK Jr. is a threat to public health.
You're saying he's being hypocritical?
Yeah, he's being hypocritical.
Absolutely.
And
do you know who the #1 hypocrites are? Healthcare providers.
The reality is, if we don't get vaccinated with Jesus, we will face God on Judgment Day.
I'm Dr. Mikhail Varshavsky, better known as Dr. Mike across social media. I'm a board-certified family medicine physician who makes content online improving health literacy. And today, I'm surrounded by 20 vaccine skeptics. My first claim is that anti-vaccine lies cost lives. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Doing fantastic. Excited to talk about health.
I just had a baby, 7 months old. And
Now, this is very malevolent, but I want you to see it because it's on YouTube and it's going viral. And this is Mike. I'm not showing you his belly, but his belly is really like Peter Thiel's belly in that 2019, not like he looks now, but like he did in 2019. It's pushing out from underneath his scrubs. And so I don't want to embarrass him, but he is looking healthier and happier and more well-fed than he did when he was wearing that blue velvet suit in 2021. And here he is sitting around what are supposed to be 20 anti-vaccine people, vaccine skeptics that are going to sit at the table and have little debates with him, and he's going to explain some things. Now, it shouldn't surprise you that his explanations are weak and they're very tried, but what should surprise you is how scripted it is that they don't have real, intelligent, well-read, thoughtful people as opposition, but instead have recruited apparently the most unrehearsed, unwell-read people that they could find with very certain opinions about things. Or a very willingness to ask this guy questions. A couple of them even have a crush on Dr. Mike, whatever his name was.
And, you know, my baby, I was like, no, I'm not getting any vaccines. The doctors came in, they made me feel like a very bad mother for not doing that, right? I was very pressured. And then I had a family friend who had a baby at the same time, was a few months in, gave vaccines to the baby, and the baby had seizures and has had seizures since. And I've also had a friend who I went on a mission trip with, and this pastor was totally healthy, two young girls, and this pastor literally got a heart attack out of nowhere. And the only thing was he took the vaccine. And there's many cases like that.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the birth of a 7-month-old. The fact that anyone made you feel bad in the healthcare system, I feel like is a failure on us in the healthcare system, so I'm sorry that happened to you. In healthcare, it's very difficult to predict the future because there are so many unknowns and there's so many...
That's what I'm talking about. Look, if you see what's under here, then he's a much bigger guy than he was a few years ago, so something's not going right for Mr. MD. More importantly, what I want to point out is what he's about to tell is a lie. And it's a lie very specifically because it's a lie that I've heard Paul Offit tell in the exact same context with the exact same set of circumstances. I have a friend. Listen.
Many variables in healthcare. There are things that are a lot that are outside of our control. And we try to do the best with the limited amounts that we can control. So when we see two things happen simultaneously in healthcare, sometimes we think they have caused one another. But unless we see a pattern of that happening over and over again on a large scale,
right,
it's more likely that this is just a coincidence of things happening at the same time. For example, I have a friend of mine who's a physician who vaccinates children very...
Understand that if, like Jason says, this woman is playing a part and she becomes kind of convinced by Dr. Mike, that is effectively a social media illusion of consensus. It is an enchantment being cast on you. Because if you see in her face that she seems convinced that Mr. Mike is right, then even if you're not convinced by what Dr. Mike said, your brain will still be left with the feeling of contradiction in the sense of, what I think is not what these two people think. Do you understand what I'm trying to teach there? What I'm trying to coach you into seeing? is that if she belies to the viewer any signal that she's being persuaded by the words that this man is speaking, it becomes an illusion of consensus to your brain, because your brain sees two people agreeing about something that you disagree with. Do you see it? I hope you can see it.
Very regularly. And they were about to give a child the vaccine, and before giving the vaccine, the child had a seizure. They went on and had more seizures throughout their life and ended up actually dying at a very young age because of a seizure disorder. The vaccine was never given. Had that happened 2 minutes later, what do you think would have...
This is almost verbatim a story that Paul Offit and several other doctors tell. In fact, it wouldn't be surprised if you have a pediatrician that's told you this same story. That's how malevolent the situation is right now. If it's okay to lie to teenagers about the reasons they shouldn't use drugs, or if it's okay to lie to teenagers about why they shouldn't have sex, it's also okay to lie to parents about why they should take or not take vaccines, because the end justifies the means. And so this is a story that I know is a lie, because there's no way that Paul Offit tells the same, that all these doctors have a doctor friend who was just about to inject and somebody had a seizure. Holy man.
Been in the mother's mind and in the father's mind in that situation, other than, I definitely think that vaccine caused that problem. But it could have just as easily happened before, which it did, and the vaccine wasn't responsible. So it's very difficult.
This chart down here is actually two charts. It is a chart from 2019 forward, and then it's a chart from 2013 to 2020 or 21. So the CDC released data, and then now it's very hard to go back before 2019. So this is like my own Excel file. Off the top of my head, I can't explain to you how to get data before 2013. I'm sure it's out there somewhere, and if you find it, I would love to have it, because I would like to have this continuing back farther. I just haven't gotten around. Sometimes that's a long chase, but that's the explanation for where this is. It's actually two graphs. They're put right together. So I'm kind of almost, there's a little bit of graphics happening here because they're not on the same graph right now. So my point is, again, and I'm just going to kind of wrap it up here. I think it's a good place to wrap it up. What you saw there is, I don't know, maybe we have to go back just a little bit and see if...
He's not necessarily anti-vaccine, but he wants safe vaccines.
Yeah. So make sure you see that the first clip starts with something about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And he responds with, I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is putting people in danger. And so what I would hope that you can understand is that TWIV is also saying that to their 100,000 viewers, and this guy's millions of viewers. There's lots of people on the left that are now saying that it's becoming really like he's killing people. He is endangering the lives of thousands of people in America. And that's a very dangerous narrative to now curate with an obviously staged event where no useful resistance or stance is going to be made, because again, there is a fake anti-vaccine movement in America that is improperly, dishonestly represented on both sides. There is a fake anti-vaccine movement that is dishonestly represented on both sides, on the right and on the left. And that has both sides trapped in thinking about this as a useful argument, and these people as significant. And what that does is that it gets people like Brandy Vaughn out of your sight. It gets the real biology out of your mind. And a video like this will get anyone on the left to once again reinforce the idea that anti-vaccine movement is nuts. The idea of being anti-vaccine is nuts. And Dr. Mike makes me feel comfortable in that. That's the trap they're in. And the trap that the Trump people are in are the frustration with, oh man, if I could have been on this show, I would have been able to explain why Dr. Mike, that there's no freedom and that they haven't done randomized control trials.
Yeah, so I'm pointing out that I think RFK Jr. is a threat to public health. You're saying he's being hypocritical.
Yeah, he's being hypocritical.
Absolutely.
And
do you know who the #1 hypocrites are? Healthcare providers.
The reality is, if we don't get
I
vaccinated,
might have to bring it to the front. Hold on, I'm gonna escape, resume the show and escape, and I might have to bring this to the front. Let me see if I do that. I'll bring it to the front because then we can skip through it a little bit and you can see exactly how ridiculous this is.
He's not necessarily anti-vaccine, but he wants safe.
Isn't it possible that there's people reporting things that after we look at it and judge it off of the VAERS system, that it is in fact not shown to be causative?
And so here we are talking about the VAERS network. And who is the curator of the VAERS network on the Trump side? It is, of course, Jessica Rose, the person with 5 post-secondary degrees, and the surfer who recently put another picture of her toes in the Spanish Ocean because she's flying around as a brownstone fellow, who also flew around for 5 years during the pandemic with people like Pierre Corey and Jill and Robert Malone. And now they are bringing up the very issue that Epigirl from the SPARS pandemic document, the same issue that Jessica Rose has been curating for 5 years, the VAERS system, and whether or not this has any useful information in it or not. It's pretty remarkable.
But in fact, a coincidence or correlation.
So yes, I would say that correlation.
Actually getting the disease will give you a better response. But do you know what you have to do in order to get that response?
Like get the virus in you?
Correct, which means you have to have all the potential risks.
All the potential risks of the virus are much worse than the risks of the vaccine, because the vaccine's a vaccine, it's safe, it's not transfection. This guy isn't smart enough to know what transfection is or that it could have been called that in 2020. And again, we're perpetuating this narrative, and a lot of these people aren't informed enough to understand it. They go, oh yeah, that's right. I remember social media, when I was skillfully using it in 2020, told me that I had to be really afraid of the virus, that even you wouldn't really want to get it. Like, it would be absurd to think that exposure to this thing, this new thing, you would even consider it.
Of having severe disease, death, and largely we've forgotten how serious these viruses and bacteria are.
We have forgotten how serious these virus and bacteria are. He doesn't even know his own narrative. That's really hilarious. In 2025, he is still fumbling.
In the 20s, in the 50s, in the 80s, the deadliness of those diseases has been largely forgotten. One of the vaccines we give to children is called Haemophilus influenza. That causes meningitis. We don't see that anymore. The residents that were trained 20 years before me, every time they were in the emergency room, they learned how to do a spinal tap to diagnose this type of meningitis because of that bacteria. I've never learned how to do it. I'm not trained how to do it. Now we have to rely on interventional radiologists to do the procedure because of vaccines.
It's really interesting because the Hib titer vaccine is not a good vaccine, and the Hib vaccine it's bad. It's really bad, probably just a placebo. It's terrible.
So the reason why I say that vaccine immunity is better than natural immunity is because you don't have to survive the actual illness.
Okay. Well, that was my question.
Thank you.
They could get another guy.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
See, so these are not anti-vaccine people. These are just skeptics that get cleared up from talking to the great Dr. Mike.
Hey, Dr. Mike. Eliezer.
Pleasure.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as
I
well.
was actually binge watching your videos this week. thinking it was going to be you. I didn't think it was going to be you. You are very good faith, which I respect. Can I ask you a question in terms, because as a vaccine skeptic, the burden of proof is on you to show that vaccines do work. So what evidence would you have that vaccines actually work?
So vaccines, unlike other drugs, and there have been claims made about this.
See, I think this is false, and I think we've made progress from here. And I think Brandy had made progress from here. I don't think that's the right way to put it. I think you should put it even better. I think you should put it to this guy to explain why intramuscular injection isn't dumb. How do you justify intramuscular injection as the application of medicine to augment the immune system of an otherwise healthy person? How does that mechanistically relate to your understanding of the immune system? You're a doctor. Explain to me why intramuscular injection is a great way to augment the immune system, and try to cite some of what you understand as the organization of the immune system so that I get a better picture of where that is in your mind. See, that's a biology question. That's a biology discussion. This is not a biology discussion. This is a semantics discussion, or a yes or no discussion, a go or no go discussion.
This in the wrong direction, where people say that vaccines aren't as tested as, let's say, pharmaceuticals. Mm-hmm. Because vaccines are given to healthy people to prevent disease, we test them an incredibly higher amount than pharmaceuticals.
That's just ridiculous, of course.
So that means pre-market.
We give them to children who are unable to report the consequences. We put it in a place where the consequences are much more likely to be temporarily unrelated in the mind of the patient, especially coupled with the fact that those patients are often under 2 years old. This is, of course, ridiculous. But understand what this is. This is 5 years of cat herding. This guy is part of the left, part of the accepted Fauci off-it narrative, and he was put in place, curated, coached, and he is there right now, fully on board, and he has no idea how wrong he is. He believes everything he says because everybody around him agrees with him. The illusion of consensus extends to anyone and everyone he talks to. And so he's happy to defend it with certainty to these people who are also trapped, albeit by the other side of the trap. They're in the same trap that he's in. The Scooby-Doo narrative of a novel virus that was leaked in a mud puddle and is now all around the world. And so none of those people in that room will ever challenge him to explain why unvaccinated people are so healthy. He will never be able to explain why it is that in places where it's been investigated, the simple application of vaccines leads to detrimental outcomes, up to 5 times worse outcomes in the children. Just one shot. And why isn't that we're not talking about the big biological idea of the difference between injecting intramuscularly versus ingesting it? That idea, remember, was from Brandy Vaughn, who was dead in December 7th, 2020. Certainly would have been a formidable opponent to the whole coronavirus narrative. She probably would have been very, very happy to tell you that it's better to get natural immunity, and natural immunity to all of these things is better, and that we get stronger when we get infected, and we make growth spurts when we get infected, which is some of the things that she was saying that I think are kind of sketchy and probably not that much, data to support these claims. And in some ways, those claims kind of undermined this main point. And I don't think that was her fault. I think that she was just so spellbound and stunned that she was the only person that was trying to get this message out, like she was trying to get it out, that she was just overwhelmed, and then they got rid of her. And again, I would challenge you to compare that to the record of somebody like Brian Hooker, who in 2013 did not use the word autism, only wanted to talk about vaccine neurological damage, questioned the rationale of vaccines in general, and had 16 years of genetically modifying plants to produce medicine. And yet somehow or another in 2020, rather than being aware that this is a transfection being misrepresented as a novel vaccine, he was more informed about the aspects of the novel virus that everybody needed to be paying attention to. He was more informed about the natural immunity idea. He was more informed about the vaccine studies being underpowered. And the worst part maybe is that he just went along with saying all of the things that he was told to say without mentioning Brandy, even though he was in movies with her and on stage with her and at meetings and conferences with her for years before the start of the pandemic. People are being murdered in America at this time, and he is talking about the virus and asymptomatic spread. And now, 5 years later, he's one of the health freedom leaders, right behind Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's had also a decade to do something about vaccines, and he's going to check the adjuvants pretty soon. I think he's going to get around to that in this term of Donald Trump's presidency. We can go back to ICANN, the Informed Consent Action Network, and find out that they were actually founded on this day, April Fool's Day in 2016. And the movie Vaxxed was also released on that date. And the movie Vaxxed had a huge cast that included Brian Hooker there and all kinds of people that we don't know and have never heard of before. The entire Polly Tommy family. Oh, there's Brandy Vaughn right there just above Dave Wakefield. And Dave Weldon, the guy that Polly says is going to be the head of the CDC in 2017 in a video with Brandy, and then on the bus. And then actually he was nominated for that in 2020, although of course his hearing didn't happen. But that's pretty interesting. Stephanie Seneff is there. Interesting list of characters in Vaxxed 1. And then, of course, in 2019, there was Vaxxed 2, but the production crew was actually much larger than the acting crew this time. The acting crew really only had Suzanne Humphries, Brian Hooker, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Jimmy Kimmel, Polly Tommy, and Andrew Wakefield. So remember, the first movie had a huge cast of anti-vaxxers and a huge cast of parents and lots of stories to tell, and included Brandy Vaughn. And after Vaxxed 1, of course, you know, people tell Brandy all the time about how she presents this stuff so well and she's such a compelling presenter. But when they made Vaxxed 2, they didn't bother to put anybody in it. They just kept it to themselves, and Polly's in it. And look at this production team. Isabella Tommy, co-producer. Jonathan Tommy, co-producer. Polly Tommy, executive producer. Robert F. Kennedy, executive producer. It's interesting. It's an interesting list of people that were in the first. The scientific advisors, Suzanne Humphries and Brian Hooker. And so, you know, 3 years later, they decide not to include Brandy Vaughn, and they don't include anybody. It's just them. And so those people are also now part of the health freedom movement, opposing medical mandates, advocating for free speech and free choice, and advocating for safe vaccines, just like kind of Brian Hooker's doing. It's almost like they didn't make any progress from 2016 until now. It was always been a health freedom movement. Interestingly, in that Vaxxed movie 2, of course, was Suzanne Humphries, who already had a book in 2013 called Dissolving the Illusion, or Illusions, and it was about smallpox and measles and sanitation and clean water. And the truth about flu vaccines is supposedly how she got there. But in 2018, we saw her talking with Brandy Vaughn, saying that she gave up on MDs. She recommends parents talk to other parents with unvaccinated kids. She can say the unvaxxed are the most healthy in 2018. She can say it's more than just vaccines, though. It's also antibiotics, but she can't explain why. Or I guess you have to go to her Facebook Live and pay in order to find out why. And no needles when your kid is sick. Very similar to Brian Hooker's message from 2013 on. They gave a bunch of vaccines to my kid when he had an ear infection, and that's what went wrong. Interesting parallels in their narratives years apart. Don't forget that she was the primary actor of Vaxxed 2 and the scientific advisor for the movie as well. And then this year she got on Joe Rogan. Started out with cinnamon has vitamin C. She quoted Paul Offit about the chemistry of various forms of mercury. She said it was more than just vaccines, but also antibiotics, but still couldn't explain why. And I think she said something about no needles when your kid is sick, but I don't even know because I couldn't stand that whole 2.5 hours of nonsense, saying nothing. Effectively saying nothing. After having a book in 2013 until now, she's basically not progressed far enough to say intramuscular injection is dumb, or RNA pandemics are ridiculous, or this was always a transfection, and Brian Hooker could have told you that in 2013. That actually, she could have even told you that Paul Offit could have told you that in 2007 because he wrote a book titled Vaccinated from Cowpox to RNA, the remarkable story of vaccines. But instead, she quoted Paul Offit about the chemistry of mercury in the Joe Rogan interview. I mean, I can't make this up. And so if you think that this ends, it's all the same story. If you look at somebody like a Columbia professor by the name of Mary Holland, who claims that her son was injured by some component of the MMR and just wants vaccines tested, she was able to say that on Democracy Now! In 2015. Then she took over as part of the World Mercury Project becoming Children's Health Defense in 2018, and then helped participate in the movie Vax 2, and helped participate in the ignoring of Brandy Vaughn and the promotion of, Brian Hooker, the geneticist, and Polly Tommy and Andrew Wakefield, the foreign meddlers, who had pulled the exact same stunt, anti-vaccine stunt, to sway voters in the UK about 8 years before. I can't make this up because, of course, Mary Holland is now one of the heads of the anti-vaccine movement, and she will recite the narrative on stage. She will recite the narrative on stage until the job is done.
Proper testing, or behind the 6-foot distancing, the 2-meter distancing, or behind these shots, right? This technology that had never been used widely. None of that is over. And as Sasha Latipa pointed out this morning, these were military operations, but they were global military operations, right? Every country had exactly the same narrative. I was fortunate to be able to travel during COVID because I had natural immunity, having had it for 2 days. I took ivermectin. I was fine.
Now that seems like bullshit to me, because I've heard her say many times that she had COVID and it was very strange. And that doesn't sound very strange. It sounds like she got it and she took ivermectin and it went away. And I don't even know how she proved that she had natural immunity. But again, as I said before, unlike Tony Fauci saying lasting immunity, unlike Dr. Mike saying lifelong immunity, these guys on this side said natural immunity. And that's not an accident. That is a semantic difference which allows that enchantment to take hold, and the people that are trapped in it don't see it. They don't see that difference, that those people debated natural immunity in the context of lifelong immunity or lasting immunity. You debated natural immunity. And so we were talking about two different things and talking past each other. And so many times free speech and medical freedom are talking past mandates and biology and justifying these things, because by design, they're not meant to mesh. Because meshing gears gets stuff done, right? It's grinding gears that we're doing here. It's grinding gears that she's doing. If she says that she was able to travel because she had natural immunity, when Robert Malone says he took the shot to travel even though he already had natural immunity. And those two are on the same team, part of the intellectual advisory committee that has ultimately fueled the rise of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. all these years. Make no mistake about it, Mary Holland was his original general campaign manager when he declared for president. She came back to CHD 2 weeks after I was hired by Laura Bono and Brian Hooker. And she's the person who fired me. It's not to say that Brian Hooker's a good guy or he's done everything right, but it is to say that there is a set of people that is behaving so obviously pro-narrative, pro-Scooby-Doo, pro-deep state performance, and her track record from 2015 to now completely edifies that interpretation. And Mary Holland could explain why somebody like Brian Hooker, with such an extensive list of experiences and knowledge, could be absorbed into a health freedom movement simply because he has an adult adult vaccine damaged child. And they can leverage that. It's a very dark place we are in because this is a fake anti-vaccine movement that has helped Trump get elected, is helping herd the cats on the right side of the political spectrum in America. And these people are as bamboozled as many people on the left are, on a completely different set of enchantments. And it's a very dangerous place for our young people to be surrounded by adults like this. Because that's who Mary Holland is bamboozling. She's bamboozling adults. Kids are bamboozled by social media and adults on social media and the kids that follow adults on social media. So if we want to protect our college kids, we need to out these people. If we want to protect our young parents, we need to out these people as a fake anti-vaccine movement so that the truth can actually get out there and we can actually save children. We can save our grandchildren from being part of this experiment, or maybe we can create a world where this experiment, or it can be attempted without enslaving our grandchildren, but instead enriching them. Because if it's this valuable and this important and has this much potential, then we ought to be able to make it so that everybody, by contributing to it, by participating in it, gets a decent payout. Are we talking about universal income now? Are we talking about digital current? Oh my goodness. Sounds like they're going to get their AI the data one way or another. Whether the good guys do it or the bad guys do it, they're probably going to get this data because this project has too much money behind it, too much planning behind it, too many books behind it. There's racks and racks of books that were written in sequence to curate and massage this narrative into existence where we are the sum of our genes. And so, never mind what we said at the beginning of the stream, where Walt Whitman says, if anything is sacred, it is the human body. We've been led to believe that human rights are sacred, that our right to freedom, our right to choose is sacred. No, ladies and gentlemen, the human body is sacred. Our human biology is sacred. And if we think our rights are sacred, if we think our right to choose is sacred, then we've already unwittingly given up on the foundation of what is sacred, that us, the individual, what you do with your life on earth. Because in 100 years, everybody that's living on this planet is going to be dead. So it doesn't really matter all the stuff that you buy, all the causes that you stand for, all the signs that you carry. What matters is what you create, what you're ready to build, what you're ready to pass down to your children. And I want to pass down a true history that understands why the last 40 years have been the way they are, the last 50 years have been the way they are, and what was motivating these people to try and assess what that data was that they would need and how to store it and how to feed it into machine learning algorithm that would start to make predictions that they could validate about human biology. And they have been all in on this idea for a very long time. And even though it's failing, even though it's miserably failing, they're all in. They have to be all in, because their assumption is that it's eventually going to work. That's why these people were put in place, why the whole coronavirus narrative was there. That's the part about it that Brandy didn't get and a lot of other people don't get. This is not about money, although that's an easy way to make things move and to make gears mesh. It's a multi-generational plan that's got nothing to do with money. It's about what you can build, what you can create, what you can establish that will last into the generations to come. And these people working for the slavers understand that that motivation is very different than, you know, what you're going to do for the next 3 weeks or stockpiling food for the next 72 hours. That's why there's so much money out there that establish so many different networks of pseudo dissidents. That none of these people are real. None of them are real because they are all essentially part of the same illusion that those individuals represent on social media. But this is how they move the money around. Substacks and nonprofits and fellows and world travel. It's all the same illusion. That's why none of these people will tell you that the only thing they have is synthetic recombinant genetics, using bacteria to make a lot of DNA, using enzymes to make a lot of RNA, has just gotten cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. That's all they've got, nothing else. And they use that to fake virology because they can make large quantities of pure DNA and then transvector transform cell cultures and then claim that what's happening is virology. Claim that what they are following around is virology, when really, when you put DNA on a cell culture and the cell culture divides, it's not surprising to find the DNA in the cultures dividing. And yet they can use this simple ability to create large quantities of pure DNA to do all of the bullshit that they do and call virology and call gain of function, and it's really just transformation and transfection of animals and cell culture. And that is the simple explanation for why no virus is a trap. Why having the opinion that there was no virus with no further explanation doesn't free our children from this narrative. It doesn't equip them to argue their way out with the retarded adults that they are surrounded by. So Tom Cowan and Andy Kaufman are never going to equip young people to argue with the bamboozled adults that they are inevitably going to be surrounded by in the coming years. They will, in fact, make them unable to interact with those adults, which would be a disaster. We need to equip our young people to argue with both sides of this malevolent narrative, both sides of this trap, so that irrespective of what adult they come up against, they are able to succinctly describe that the only thing they have is recombinant genetics. And recombinant genetics are enough to create any PCR fraud they want to. And a background signal with fraudulent PCR tests would be all they would need to misconstrue a background as spread. And this can be explained to the left and to the right and couched in the right way for the left and the right, depending on the questions that they ask, as long as you understand the foundational principle biology here. Just like explaining that overcycling isn't the thing. What you need to understand is it's really, really easy. They could have produced a large quantity. They could produce as much as is in this pen, and that would be enough DNA to put it anywhere they wanted to and find it, in a people, in a cruise ship, in a wet market, and it would be enough to find it in all of those places. And it would be just as simple as Murray Gardner carrying the AIDS virus home in a Eppendorf tube and bringing it to Bob Gallo's lab as it would be for me to bring a very hot positive PCR signal to a coronavirus anywhere I wanted to go once it was made using the standard industrial processes available at any pharmaceutical company that makes a biologic. And so transfection is a crime, and it was before the pandemic. It was only used on cancer patients and genetically, deficient people, and it failed every time, and transfection remains a crime now. It is not an investigational vaccine. It hasn't proven its worth. The reason why you think, or social media and mainstream media thinks and tells us that it is because in reality, they could have met and did meet any manufacturing quota with placebo. That's why that story that Tony Fauci was telling is so relevant. That other countries are short and, they can't get the vaccine they want. They're literally dying to get a vaccine over there. Is all part of driving the narrative. Get your placebo, because once you take a placebo, you're bamboozled. Once you take the placebo and then you don't get sick, once you take the placebo and you don't have a reaction, now you believe that, well, vaccine didn't hurt me. I didn't get sick from it. Endemicity is another illusion that you can attack. It's another way that you can approach this question and try to understand what endemicity means. And all of the biological assumptions that are made when you use a word like that to describe what a molecule can do or has done. Ladies and gentlemen, RNA cannot pandemic. Non-specific PCR tests on a background would have been enough, especially if they don't talk about 2020 where all the murder occurred. Ladies and gentlemen, intramuscular injection is dumb. RNA cannot pandemic. And transfecting healthy people was a crime. There was a population pyramid problem, and they probably managed it really well and continue to manage it now. Thank you very much for joining me. Sorry for the interruption earlier. I think it's important to interact with you guys in the chat and make sure that I try to clear up anything that's there. And sometimes, Sometimes it's not possible to clear it up because people aren't interested in that. They're interested in causing trouble. In this case, it seems like Free Mayonnaise wants to make sure that anybody that's hearing him is going to try to think about the possibility that Jay doesn't like disagreement, which I don't really know what the motivation is for that. But suffice it to say that we've got our work cut out for us. We've got a lot of stuff to do, and we've got it all planned out now after all this work. And so it's going to be fun. Tomorrow is a journal club. We're going to be talking about the microbiome of honeybees. And then on Thursday, we're going to have our first Biology 101 lecture for the new year. I'm excited about that. And then Friday, we'll do our first weekly Gigaohm Biological High Resistance Low Noise Information Brief. If you want to support the stream, please go to gigaohmbiological.com and find a way to support the stream. Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you very much, Stephen, and all these other people that are coming through in the clutch. Yeah, it's fantastic. We had another car bill this weekend, which nobody ever needs to take their car to the mechanic. And so when you have to go, it's always, it's just brutal. Anybody living in Pittsburgh and knows a South Side mechanic that's trustworthy, that would be great. We're looking for one. And yeah, if you want to share the replay, please go to stream.gigaohm.bio. And if you want to communicate with us, go to gigaohm.bio. And we have a little soapbox there as well. Thank you very much for joining me. See you guys again soon.